Good morning, welcome back. Today we're going to look at two sets of aggregate functions in Access, which on the surface appear to do the same thing or something very similar, but which in reality return or can return quite different results. So I'm going to talk about both sets and explain to you why I think the min and max functions are more appropriate in more situations than the first and last functions. Humans are much better than computers at resolving ambiguity. We're trained from birth to do that. People can look at a series or a list of values, for example, and decide which one is the first and which one is the last by referencing both the values themselves and the context in which that question was asked. Perhaps such a question might be, of this list of people and their birth dates, which birth date came first? We don't need to have the birthdays sorted in date order to answer that question because our minds are trained to recognize the context as well as the values. For example, if the list of birth dates is presented to us with the names of the people sorted alphabetically, we don't go to the top of the list and automatically pick it because it's first, because we know that that's not the right context for first birth date. We scan the entire list of all of the birth dates, looking for the earliest one relative to the other birth dates. That kind of disambiguation is a skill computers are still learning, and one which relational database applications are not really set up to handle. We still need to make explicit to the computer which sort order the computer needs to use to find the first. Put it in a different way. If the question is phrased as we did previously in this discussion, the sort must be earliest birth date to most recent birth date on the birth date field in order to find the first and the last. The sort order has to give us earliest or first in the first position. If the question is phrased differently, however, the sort must be different in order for the database, the Access, to get the right answer. If the question is this, of this list of people and their birth dates, which one is the birth date of the first person on the list? In order to answer that question, we need to ask another question, a clarifying question. If you have a list of people and you want to find the birth date of the first person, how do you decide who is going to be the first person? One common method of deciding who comes first is to sort on names. In this case, we'll sort on last name. When the question is asked explicitly in that way, it's easy to see why and how the answer will be different. We're asking about birth dates in two different contexts: the date, oldest, newest, or the person, alphabetically first to last. And that means first can't return. Well, sometimes it can, but most of the time it doesn't return the same answer in both contexts. Because of that ambiguity, many seasoned Access developers prefer to use the min and max functions instead of first and last when working with dates. Min and max are absolutes within the values themselves, regardless of any context. If you ask for the min, you get the least or the smallest in that field, regardless of how the context of that field is presented. The minimum will always be the same regardless of the sort order, and the same is true for the max. It will always be the same regardless of the sort order, because those functions, min and max, only reference the values within the single field, regardless of any sort applied on any of the other fields. In order to use first and last effectively, therefore, you need to know both the field that you're searching for, the largest or the latest or the newest or the most recent or the oldest or the first value, however you define that. You also need to know that the sort order applied to that record set is the correct one to give you the right answer as to first and last. So now we know why most experienced Access developers prefer min and max functions to the first and last functions when trying to find the earliest or the smallest or the latest or the largest value in a field, because min and max operate against only the values in the specified field and don't need to refer to any particular sort order on the record set itself as a whole to get the right answer. As we mentioned before, first and last do have their place properly used, but min and max tend to be more robust for most situations in Access. The image we're looking at now illustrates some of the concepts which we have just been discussing, laid out in sort of a summary fashion. On the left-hand side of the picture, you'll see the SQL for the three queries. The first query at the top has no sort order applied. The second and third queries do have sort order clauses in order to illustrate the concepts we've just been looking at. Otherwise, the SQL is the same. This query, which has no sort order, by default, Access will return that in the sort order following the primary key. Now, you can't rely on that giving you useful results because there's no guarantee, there's no guarantee that it will actually be sorted by the primary key, and there's no guarantee that the sequence you want, the sort order you want, is going to be reflected by the order in which the primary keys were assigned. So even though it looks in this very simple example like the primary key does give us a useful sort, that's an artifact of the fact that we have to have some order, and Access uses the default. In the query in the center, we see the SQL, the same SQL, with an order by clause. In this case, we are ordering it by employee last name. And again, when we order by employee last name, coincidentally, employee ID 1 is also the employee whose last name is earliest in the alphabet. This is, again, a coincidence. Just because Amici sorts to the top of the list alphabetically and happens to be the first primary key doesn't mean you can count on similar results in other cases. And in the final query at the bottom, the SQL at the left, you can see the order by clause is on employee birth date, and the resulting records are then sorted oldest to newest on birth date. And this time we see that the 6/2/1988 does sort to first position. So with this sort order on birth date, we could use first to get the appropriate birth date. For our final example, let's look at the use of min and max in a single query to generate a record set that shows us the first birth date, the last birth date, the minimum birth date, and the max birth date for our employee list. You can see at the top, again, we have the default sort, order by employee ID, which is the primary key. And in the first row, we have 6/3/1990. And in the last row, we have 6/2/1988. When we use the first, last, min, and max functions on birth date, we get the results shown at the very bottom. The first birth date on the list is the 6/3/1990. That's the one belonging to the record in the first position in this unsorted record set. The last birth date corresponds to the fourth record, the last record in the current unsorted record set, which is 6/2/1988. However, min correctly returns the minimum birth date, or the earliest birth date, which is 6/2/1988. It does not depend on the position in the record set. It depends on the position in that field. And the same is true for max. It returns 7/7/1996, which is the largest value in that field. Note that because we're using aggregate functions in this query, we're not able to group on other fields and get meaningful results. So our query returns only the four aggregates: first, last, min, and max. To be useful in an actual application, you would need to take this information, as you see here, and incorporate it into a more comprehensive query. If you liked what you saw, please subscribe and come back and visit in the future. Thank you.